Hi everybody, and thanks for joining us this morning. Our goal for the next 20 minutes or so is to share with you how Microsoft Teams and 365, tools which are perhaps already in place in your organisation, can really enhance internal communications when facing the challenge of a remote workforce. We've left 20 minutes at the end so that we can answer any questions that you may have. If there's any functionality that we don't cover that you're particularly looking for, then please add a comment or a question in the comments box on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer it at the end. So, we are 4 professionals with very different but complementary skills. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sarah Edwards and I specialise in internal communications and engagement, particularly in the context of change and organisational culture.
Hi, I'm Claire Milsom. I'm an event and video producer with a background in graphic design.
Hello, I'm Hugh Valentine, your Microsoft tech guru. Just as a point of housekeeping, we won't be issuing a PowerPoint at the end of this. We'll be just demonstrating the capability of Microsoft 365 and Teams in our own secure environment. We'll post a recording on this at YouTube at the very end.
Hello everyone, my name is Mark and I'm the Cloud Solutions Architect with Circle, focusing on digital transformation and business change within the Microsoft 365 and Azure stacks. And we work closely with Valto on these types of projects. Our customers have seen real business change and experienced immediate benefits through the implementation of these services. And I'll be here monitoring your questions throughout, so please feel free to ask as many questions as you like, as I will be on hand to answer these along with everyone else during the Q&A session at the end.
As we all know, the environment for communicating with colleagues has changed beyond all recognition. The well-worn path of blending electronic, hard copy and face-to-face communications, widely regarded as the best way to connect and engage, now looks more like video calls, telephone calls, email and perhaps WhatsApp groups. In-person meetings, conferences, events, forums and briefings are no longer possible. So IT, HR and communication teams are scrambling to find a solution.
From an events perspective, the lights have just been turned off. Organisations that typically held large-scale events just stopped. This time last year it was entirely different, of course. I'd be out on site at client locations in hotels and conference centres at live events, with halls full of people, all sitting next to each other with that shared sense of anticipation that you get with a face-to-face event. And of course, well-rehearsed presenters. All these COVID restrictions seem to have pretty much paralysed clients. For months, they didn't really know what to do or how to respond. Some of them decided to try and move everything virtual, essentially just bunging a share screen online, usually resulting in disembodied voices and a return to the old death by PowerPoint. Well, that's clearly an option, but is it feasible to hold a 2-day event for colleagues or managers to just watch? Is it going to get the most from the team and ensure that they connect to the objectives of the event? Is it really even reasonable to ask someone to sit and watch a 45-minute briefing and fully absorb the content when they already spend all day in front of a screen, working or in video call meetings?
From an IT perspective, the demand for two-way communication channel has rocketed. As organisations get to grip with the need for IT solutions which work globally and enable smooth and professional communications with clients, suppliers, and of course colleagues, the need is immediate. SharePoint is widely known for its collaboration tools. What many don't realise is that there are multiple features within Microsoft Teams which can host a range of communications and help facilitate dialogue, regardless of the size and geographical reach of the organisation. And these channels also link to Microsoft 365, enabling you to connect to your usual work environment seamlessly. So for those of you who are already on Microsoft 365, you have an integrated solution without the need to introduce new software, which will not only incur additional license fees, but will also be separate to your usual IT interface.
We clearly need more than an IT interface or simply shifting the things that we've done before online, and therein lies the challenge. We need to think differently. Be more creative about how colleagues get the information that they need and stay focused long enough to not only digest it, but to clearly understand what that means for them. The interactive, dynamic channels that we use to encourage dialogue, discussion and feedback must transform and consider the technological world we're in. Social media gives us an idea. When 94.4% of millennials and 77.5% of Generation X use social media, there's a good chance that the majority of colleagues in your organisation do too. Social media presents content and engages with the audience through bite-sized news items, succinct video footage, or insightful content which the user has chosen to interact with. Multiple platforms such as Twitter, Instagram and YouTube show us how users prefer to get their content from both a visual and a detail perspective. So how can we use this for an internal audience, particularly when they need to know things like health and safety, or there's content that we want people to really understand and connect with, like the business goals? With a remote audience, perhaps we need to think even more about how our colleagues, the end users, how they like to receive the information and the balance of channels that we should therefore use.
Clearly, it isn't a simple task to make your digital live events, colleague briefings, videos and live streams as engaging as they are in person. But if you've already got a platform in your organisation with the capability that you need, then you've got a really good start. Making the whole integration attractive, engaging and appealing is what will draw people to use these channels, just as they do with their choice of social media platform.
By having content in multiple forms on multiple channels, you can have the confidence that colleagues will get the information they need in a format they can connect with. Smaller, more concise pieces of content can get the message across, and it's important to remember attention spans, particularly in a technological setting. Microsoft Teams and 365 supports this as part of the overall software package and is fully integrated. Selecting add-on applications appropriate to your business and to the colleagues within your organization will create a seamless working environment on the same platform.
We're now going to walk through an example of what we could use to engage a remote workforce to give you an idea of how we can make digital events more engaging and interactive through Microsoft Teams. In our case, it's a colleague briefing, but as we demo, you'll see how it can easily be applied to monthly briefings, leadership conferences, functional conferences, or ad hoc team meetings. We'll also show you how to maintain ongoing dialogue, integrate with business as usual, and also some measurement tactics. The context is a global engineering organisation with around 1,200 colleagues across multiple locations. As with an in-person event, the front-end process starts with a save the date and an invitation.
When we think of events, engagement is paramount. We create a theme, something that provides an identity for the messaging, visually stands out and grabs attention, thereby connecting people to what you're trying to achieve. Content, of course, is king, making sure there is a common thread throughout the event with messages that build in layers and are presented clearly and succinctly. From a creative and quality content perspective, digital events shouldn't be treated any differently. We should be applying the same standards and consider the whole event from start to finish.
For our event, this is the first step for promotion. We've hosted it on the Holler Global Intranet site, which is accessible globally, whether colleagues are desk-based, working remotely, or out in the field. You can see we've shown how you can really bring the site to life with rolling news, links to other systems and videos, and we've also made sure that it's got functionality to make this useful, like links to other key areas and who the champions are in the organization, and other useful links for that user to find. As we move to inviting colleagues to the event, we can do this in multiple ways over a couple of different platforms. Emailing in the traditional way is still likely to be needed, so a branded invitation with the link to the microsite would work as it has done before. This can also be posted to your company's all-colleague team site, which will enable people to comment and share. The microsite is tailored to our event, so it's showing content with links to find more information. For example, the latest business strategy presentation, upcoming information about the event, the latest event dates, an area with a countdown timer, and the ability for people to provide feedback along with key links, agenda information, and the guest speaker biographies, making it the one-stop shop for your event. Back in the old colleague team site, we can use this to start driving a lot of the event communications. So you can see here we're announcing the guest speakers. I'm able to jump in a thread and I can tag a colleague and say, thanks for the feedback. So we can get some real-time quick feedback and start to like posts that people are doing. We've got some information about the agenda and briefing. We've even got a countdown section here where all the colleagues who are attending this can start to like and feedback in real time. We also have an Ask a Question section. So people who are unsure about the event can ask questions like, can we have access to the PowerPoint following the event? Will the upcoming webinar be recorded? So all this information is to hand, and the people who are organising the event can jump in and ask questions to say, yes, this will be recorded, and we can then upload those to the microsite that we've demonstrated previously.
So while all this is happening, prep behind the virtual scenes should be well underway. For our demo colleague briefing, the duration is 15 minutes. It's an update from the Holler CEO to all colleagues as part of the overall engagement programme. The length of the session is intentionally short, acknowledging that colleagues already spend the majority of their day in front of a screen. 15 minutes is long enough to share the business update and key messages, and short enough to hold attention. This demo shows the CEO shot against a green screen and keyed into a virtual set. But obviously this could be presented from anywhere, even a live walk around the factory floor, assuming there's an internet connection and the right AV equipment. On the right-hand side, you can see the chat functionality. This is where people can add comments. There's also a Q&A tab. In fact, as viewers of this, you also have the same functionality. So please do send us any questions and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Now, obviously, this is only a short clip to give you a flavour of how it would work in practice, when in fact the experience that you're all having right now is the same that the colleagues would be having at the Holler briefing.
By Q1 next year, Breakout Room functionality will be able to separate your teams into subgroups to work on outside of the main plenary area. Incorporating breakouts into your meetings or events maintains energy and focus, so finding a way to do this remotely is important. Clearly, how you structure the agenda and the time spent in plenary versus breakout will determine how your colleagues stay engaged. Whilst we're here, I'll show you the translation and subtitle functionality, which will help for those colleagues in different parts of the world and for those whose first language isn't English. Within the breakout, you can also access the whiteboard to capture notes, actions, and output of your discussion before transferring them into Word or OneNote for future reference.
The team's live events experience is scalable, depending on what level of production you want or need. Using it can be simple and easily delivered, or you can really raise the production values by using a full AV crew, just as you would have done at a face-to-face event. All this, of course, depends on multiple factors, including what you're trying to achieve, the type of event you're hosting, and available budget.
So, as we know, the usual challenge that many in-house teams have is budget. And although this is an opportunity to move face-to-face events online and potentially reduce costs, what are the main things that we need to think about in terms of bringing a digital event to life?
The first thing to think about is clear audio. Believe it or not, to a certain extent, a viewer will tolerate a glitchy picture, but if they can't hear properly, you can guarantee they'll switch off. Your voice needs to be close to a decent mic. Investing in some basic audio equipment for in-house use, like a cheapish tie clip mic, can make a world of difference. Second is the picture and what's in it. It's this which will keep colleagues connected, particularly if the content is strong. The most important factor of the camera picture is eye contact. Being able to look directly towards the camera lens creates a connection with the viewers at the other end. You also need to think about lighting. As a general rule of thumb, the cheaper the camera, the more light you need. Think about where you are in the frame. What else can the camera see? For example, make sure your background looks interesting. Maybe do a little bit of set dressing if you need to. And finally, there is the possibility of using AV mixing software to add production graphics and create layouts with multiple camera sources. You can also add elements like a bug, which is the logo in the corner, lower thirds, that's the presenter name caption that pops up at the bottom of the screen, news tickers, and panel session layouts. There are stacks of options out there, from free open source software to high-end TV production hardware, and almost all can be set up to be used as virtual camera and sound inputs into Teams or as a direct encoder. And just to give you an idea of what can be achieved, this event is being mixed and streamed with free open source software from my garden office here in Worcestershire.
As the briefing comes to a close, we'll go back to the microsite. Here you can access the materials from the briefing, play back the event and see all of the videos, or even watch it for the first time if you missed a session. You can provide feedback and see the survey results live, including the Net Promoter Score and comments, and even download the presentation. Once out of here and back in your SharePoint, you can have access to your usual day-to-day interface with all of the documents, the team sites that you need, and access to everything else. There are additional features within 365 and Teams, which can also help with day-to-day engagement and activity, including Together Mode, showing all meeting participants as one group, which helps build an engaging and virtual environment. Coming soon to the platform are new functions, including Teams video custom layouts, live event, webinar registration and reporting, and well-being reports with productivity insights.
So as we all continue to get our heads together about the impact of remote working, a shift is required. We need to think more in the context of social media and less in the context of traditional face-to-face communications whereby everybody has to be in the same room at the same time. As internal communicators, we need to rethink and consider how we can best share information and news in a way that will be received in the best way possible. Emphasising visually led content, layering messages which encourage colleagues to find out the detail for themselves, and using more dynamic, interactive and creative online campaigns and events will all help boost morale, motivation and engagement. Today, we've looked specifically at the current challenge of face-to-face communications. Undoubtedly, the Microsoft 365 and Teams platform has many other applications and tools which can support the sharing of announcements and day-to-day messaging in the wider context of internal communication and engagement. We all have complementary but very different skills and experience. So if you need IT, event or communication strategy support to help you get the most out of your applications and software, we can help. Our contact details are coming up. I'd like to thank you for listening and can see that we already have some questions and comments starting to come in. So I'm now going to hand over to Mark, who's going to facilitate a Q&A. Mark.
So firstly, I'd like just to thank Hugh, Sarah and Claire for their contribution for today's session. There's been a lot of work that's gone into this behind the scenes to create the content and production of this event. So we hope that you found the content useful and we'll put it into some real world usage. We're now going to take some questions that have been asked during the event, so please feel free to keep these coming as well. And we will moderate those and publish them so everyone can see within the chat window. So the first question that we've got that's come up is from Liz. We use an intranet for key information to share across the firm or emails to all staff. We also have Teams for collaborative working and Yammer to help share discussions, but it's difficult to get staff to buy in and use Yammer. Are there any tips?
Yeah, so I can pick that one up. So one of the key challenges is you've got a lot of different tools there that will be providing similar functionality. You've got your emails that are sending out to the whole organization. You've got Teams that's being used as a collaborative platform. And you also have then Yammer, which provides very similar functionality to Microsoft Teams. I would suggest that you look at the three products as a whole, look at the current adoption of Microsoft Teams, and then see if we could perhaps utilize Microsoft Teams to provide the same functionality. Can you create teams for an old company? Can you create social teams? Things like that. And then if Yammer is still required, I'd also then look at the integration that's available for Microsoft Teams. So we can get a plugin for Yammer that sits into Microsoft Teams, and it brings those collaboration features of Yammer into the Teams world as well. So that would be what I would recommend.
I think I would build on that and say that, you know, I think it needs to be part of your overall communication strategy. So making it integrated in everything that you do, so it's a consistent part of your kind of everyday communication. So utilising the Teams facilities and the functionality, so that you can actually get people to engage in involving communication and conversation, really.
Great, thanks, Sarah. So another one we have here is, how would you suggest we avoid Teams fatigue? I think that's probably something we've all had recently. So what's your best tips on avoiding that?
I think as a starting point, it's about putting a good framework in for when people should use tags and notifications. So a thing I see in a lot of organizations is they're a bit tag happy. If you're constantly always tagging the whole team, or you're tagging people that don't necessarily need to be involved, that's when you start hitting team fatigue. People are getting overwhelmed with the number of notifications, and then they start to switch off the platform. So I recommend you look at a governance strategy to tag people when they're needed, tag the whole company when it's essential and critical, and then just tag individuals when you want to grab their attention.
I think I can just jump in on this one again. I think there's also a very clear well-being message around this, in terms of expectations of people being sitting in front of the computer from 8 till 5, 8 till 4, 9 till 5, whatever it might be. And I think that it's really important for an organisation to recognise that and not have that expectation. It links very much to the governance that Hugh's just been talking about, but it's recognising that people shouldn't be sitting in front of the screen constantly without any kind of breaks.
Fab. And I think from my own personal perspective as well, even just something as simple as having some general rules within your own organisation to book the meetings 45 minutes as opposed to an hour, to try and give yourself that 50-minute break in between, certainly helps with alleviating some of that. So we've got a question here from Emily. How much time is required to prep for something like this? Is it something we can easily do? And I think that leads on to a couple of other questions we've had as well around, how did this event get kind of produced, and is there somebody in the background that's orchestrating a lot of this, which I can see from some of the other questions as well.
Maybe I should start and pick up on that one. Is it easy to produce? Well, as I said in the presentation, Teams itself, you know, you can put together a live event very straightforward. You know, you have your producer view, and you can switch between camera pictures of the various presenters and their share screen, but that's all you can do. It's different to a meeting. Like, you can't have a gallery effect like we've got here with all of us up together. It doesn't work like that. So when you want to get into that level of production, it is a step up. As I said in the presentation, I am producing it all here from my desk. So this is why my eyes keep looking around, because I have multiple screens and various buttons to press to switch between things. And how long does it take to put together? Well, I'm learning this. Again, as I said in my presentation, if I was recommending this to a client who had any sort of budget for an event that they would typically do to an audience, and they would spend money on an AV crew, I would say get an AV crew in for me to try and manage sound, picture, video playback, build all of that stuff. That is a lot to do, and yes, it took a lot of preparation. You know, we've been working on this for at least a couple of weeks. But if you've got the right team behind you, then that takes all that stress away from you. I'm a behind the scenes person, and I'm nervous doing this with my buttons to press and make sure it all works. If you were to try and do it yourselves, you'd need a lot of practice. You would need a lot of practice. So I hope that answers your question.
Just on that point as well, I think it's the preparation that you would apply, as Claire said, from the AV perspective, but also in terms of working out what the storyline is, what that red thread is through the event, whether it's a colleague briefing, whether or not it's a functional conference or a leadership conference, and actually being really clear on what you're wanting to achieve as you would do ordinarily. So I think investing that time generally is obviously kind of a big part of producing something like this.
Yeah, and I think just to add to the comments that have been said so far, that this can obviously we've gone to a lot of effort to put choreography around this to make sure that we've got the right graphics and everything else in play. You can go to the other length of it as well, though, by having live events, so you can get up to speed on this gradually and get up to speed with doing these events in a gradual way, so that you're not having to go straight into something as detailed as what we've put together today.
Also, in my demonstration, I did show some of the new tools that are coming that'll simplify the overlay capabilities out of the box. So that is a new feature that's come in that might allow us to do those layouts a little bit easier than some of the tools that are available now.
And just adding to this this thread as well, or the question that we've currently got, we've got a question from Friedel and Louise, which kind of tie into the same thing, if you don't mind, Claire. But what kind of AV production software do you recommend, or can you share any brands? As well as, is it possible to pre-record these types of events as well?
Okay, sure. So I'm using OBS, which is free open source software. Any of the gamers out there will probably have heard of it if they watch anything like Twitch or anything like that. Pretty much all of the streamers use OBS. It's, as I say, it's free, it's open source. It has multiple plugins to build on it. It's relatively easy to use if you've got any kind of familiarity with video editing software and that kind of thing. But if you want to get involved in paid software, what seems to be becoming kind of the industry standard is a piece of software called vMix. There's also Wirecast is another brand that a lot of people use for mixing. And then at the next level, by the time you get into AV production companies who are helping you do this, that's when you get into the hardware aspects and media servers and multiple inputs into that before you send a feed out via a hardware encoder. It can all be input into Teams as a virtual camera, whether you're in a meeting or a live event. Interestingly, a week or two ago, I upgraded my version of Teams and virtual camera had disappeared, the option to input as virtual camera, so I had to downgrade. I would anticipate that it will be something that will be fixed as time goes on, but currently you kind of need to be on a version below the most recent version to be able to input your virtual camera and virtual sound.
Thank you. So something in that we've got here from an anonymous around utilization of Yammer and best practices. So we are currently using Teams across our organization, but are currently considering Yammer to engage with all staff. Would you recommend org-wide Teams and Yammer, or just Teams? We want to maximize engagement across a broad remote workforce. So how would you suggest we tackle that?
We kind of touched on this in one of the previous conversations. Microsoft Teams and Yammer do provide very similar functionality. If you're in the process currently of trying to get more people up to speed with using Microsoft Teams, and you then bring in another tool like Yammer, which provides very similar functionality, you may find that adoption of Teams starts to fall and Yammer starts, and you'll end up with a disparate use of the two applications. I would really consider whether Microsoft Teams can provide all the functionality and then try and develop a strategy for where Yammer can fit into that process, if at all.
Yeah, I think one of the things that certainly I've seen in my career is the kind of, as you've introduced IT systems into organisations, for some reason or other, the actual adoption of all of that capability doesn't quite hit the mark, and IT updates all become too difficult and too much to do. So I would totally agree with what Hugh's saying, that actually having an organisation totally all on the same platform or using the same tools within that platform, it by its nature is going to start to help drive an engagement if those are the channels and tools that are being used all the time, particularly if some of those tools are also used to support some of these digital face-to-face, if you like, events that we're kind of obviously needing to consider at this point, given the pandemic. So I think I totally wholeheartedly agree with Hugh but it's about creating it in a very engaging way. So understanding why is it helpful and how will it help me in my job.
I also think just on the back of that, it helps to come up with a strategy for when you're rolling those out, rather than just deploying an all-company team and then seeing what happens. I really recommend that people come up with this sort of 3-month strategy of, okay, what type of communications are we going to put in there? Are we going to have video? Are we going to chat? Can we brand those up? So that when you start to create that all-company team, it's really got an engaging 3-month plan to drive that adoption and get people thinking, right, this is really useful and I can see why I'd want to use it.
Absolutely, completely agree with that. I think where it falls down is where you've got a communication strategy that's not talking to an IT strategy, that's not talking to an HR strategy for training. And I think where you've got something like this, you really need it to be adopted at the highest level, really, and part of a wider business strategy. And the communications leg obviously is around engagement and communication, and IT in terms of implementation. But they all need to talk to each other.
Great, thanks for that both. And along the same lines, we've got a question here from John, specifically aimed at internal comms within the police force, where they've got a big challenge is engaging frontline officers when out and about. Is there anything specific that you can add to that scenario around what we've just talked about in terms of the strategy and everything else?
I think from my perspective, this is kind of I touched on this a little bit in the video, that I think we need to kind of start to rethink a little bit in terms of our internal communications and move away from that traditional side to more social media led. So if we think about how we take our information in terms of social media, it's all very short and succinct. And if the tools and techniques through Microsoft Teams can be applied to a tablet or a mobile phone, it can help then encourage people who are in the field to be able to access that information. But it's a combination. It's about the accessibility of that communication through devices, but it's also about making sure that your content is succinct and short and to the point that gets your message across in a way that's engaging.
Thank you. An anonymous question that we've had is, what budget do we need to have a virtual event besides buying the right microphone, lighting, etc.? And I think we've had a couple of other questions that around kind of how much does it cost in terms of Teams and everything, and that'll be purely down to what 365 license that you have. But Teams is included in most Office 365 licensing, which will enable you to produce events like this. So can I hand over to the rest of the panel on what budget do you think needs to be set aside for something like this?
Me and Sarah are going to answer this one. I know we are. So you saw in our presentation, we laughed at each other when we talked about budget, because, you know, I am agency side, if you like, and Sarah is client side, if you like. That's how we met, incidentally. And as she said, you know, budget is always a sticking point. And people always ask me, whether it's a video production, whether it's a face-to-face event, or whether it's something like this, how much does it cost? Well, it depends what you need and what you want and what you're trying to say. How long's a piece of string? The way that I always answer this question is, you can't ask how much is a car. Do you want it to be a Ferrari, or do you want it to be a Ford Ka? They're still cars. They still get you from A to B. They've still got a wheel in each corner, but they're very, very different objects, if you like, and the same is for events. So, you know, something like this could be relatively cheap because you're just paying for one or two people's time to put together the graphics, the video content that is played back, to manage the sound and the switching, and the video switching and that sort of thing. That would be the cheaper end of the scale to produce something of this sort. You could go to the other end of the scale and you could get involved in extended reality, where you've got presenters in a green screen studio with cameras that map their position in the room and follow them round, so it looks as though they're in a real environment. Actually, what I've seen recently with extended reality is on Strictly Come Dancing. You know, when they've got these crazy things sort of appear in the room. So that's what extended reality is. So that would be the other end of the production scale. So ultimately, Teams is just your facility to broadcast that content. If you're asking me the question, how much does it cost to put that together? Depends what you want and what you need and what you think would be relevant. And as Sarah mentioned, what is going to be best received by the audience. There's no point in spending a shed load of money on something to have an extended reality studio if it doesn't really add anything to the message. You know, you've got to find the right balance between something that makes your audience go, oh, wow, I'm engaged, and okay, I understand and I'm listening. I don't know if you've got anything to add, Sarah.
Well, to be honest, I think you've covered everything that I would have said, Claire. Thanks. But it's ultimately about what you're trying to achieve, and how does that fit in with your overall business strategy, communication strategy, and kind of, as I say, what you're trying to achieve and how you want it to look.
The only thing I'd add on top of this, just to answer a few of the other questions that have come through, from a Microsoft 365 licensing perspective, Microsoft 365 Business Premium doesn't include the ability to do live events. So you'd have to look at a Microsoft 365 E3 license or above, or you can get an add-on license as well. So you need to just make sure you've got the correct licenses for 365 to do these live events as well.
Just like to add, I've got an E1 license and I can do it.
An E1.
Yeah. And that's a lot cheaper.
To get around things. Ingenuity there, Claire.
So we're due to end this event in about 5 minutes' time, so we'll take a couple more questions now and hopefully get as many in as we can. So we've got another one here from Stuart. With the fiscal year coming to the final stride, projects are coming to a close. Some are finding the amount of information, such as Planner, Teams, SharePoint and email, quite overloading. How would you encourage people getting used to the new information layout of Office 365 and all its quirks?
So some ideas on this. There's a whole host of tools that are available in Microsoft 365, and one of the common pitfalls that we see people doing is training their employees just on the functionality of those tools. So they'll show people every single feature that's available in Microsoft Teams, how to chat, how to do a meeting. They may show Planner and how to do the tasks management. But the key piece that they're often missing is, how does that relate to their day job? So when we go out and show people these tools and we explain how they can work, we're very much looking at their current way of working. And then when we deliver a training or an overview of how they could use it, it's applying those current ways of working to say, well, this is how you could use Teams to manage your team. So a simple example is, you do a daily stand-up in the office at the moment. Well, perhaps you can create a daily team, create a thread, and you could replace your daily stand-up with that. And then that means people working from home and the office can all participate. So we find that it's very easy to create these ways of working. We call them cheat sheets, to say, this is how your department should work. Here's the features that will help. And then when we deliver the training on that, they don't get overwhelmed with all the features and the functions, and they're very much the light bulb moment of, yes, this is how I could work comes on for them.
Great, thanks, Hugh. So we've got another question here from Andrew. So there's some nice feedback there. Thank you, Andrew. But I think it would be good to get your opinions as well, in light of Andrew's question, around how do we potentially see these virtual events changing post-COVID-19 era? As and when that happens, nobody knows yet. But will people crave face-to-face? And events, or will there be a mismatch and blend of digital and face-to-face? And how would you see that working?
So Claire,
it's all right.
Jump in, off you go.
Okay. I think all of the above, actually. I think that, yes, people will naturally crave face-to-face. I mean, who isn't stuck in lockdown right now and just wants to go and see some people that they haven't seen for a while? The same is going to apply to the corporate world. Whatever organisation you're in, you're going to want face-to-face. One of the first things I said in my presentation was that sense of anticipation that you get in a room full of people. Like, it can never, ever be replicated via a video medium. However, I do think that there is going to be very much a blend. It's kind of being dubbed in the industry as hybrid. And who knows at what point we're going to be sort of completely free again to do as we will. But I think even from a budget point of view, or just as a general working, being flexible with our audiences, I think a hybrid solution is going to be something that will definitely happen going forward. So if you're not already kind of on board with this virtual delivery method, I suggest that you do, because it's here to stay, without a doubt. Yes, we are in the future. I would fully expect to still go back to having rooms full of people, but I think their delivery and their format and their setup will be very different. I spoke to a production manager friend of mine some weeks ago now, and we both kind of have in our heads that the environments, once people are back in the room, are going to be more like live TV studios. So the video live stream of things isn't kind of just going to be an add-on. You know, that the audiences will be considered as equals. So, you know, you're probably going to be looking for venues that have got raked seating in them so that you can get good camera views around things. I think the face-to-face events will be different because they're hybrid. Sarah, did you want to add anything?
Well, you covered quite a lot there. I think I would only add that, you know, clearly, as good as these events could be and could become with fantastic graphics and the technology and the platforms, etc., they'll never replace face-to-face communication. And I don't think any of us are trying to say that this does replace. I think I completely agree with everything that Claire's just said. You know, it will be a hybrid. I think probably what we'll need to start working through as we go forward is how we make sure we have that engagement and really help make sure that colleagues are connecting as we want them to, as we hope they did before, and they continue to do as things evolve and we work out kind of what the solution is. I mean, I think the internal communications and engagement strategy that you have needs to be a moving feast, undoubtedly, at this point.
Great, thank you for those insights. And on that note, we're near enough out of time, and I appreciate that we've had an awful lot of questions, and some of those we haven't had time to get to. So what we will do is try and answer those. For those of you that have submitted your names, we'll try and get back to you with some answers on those specific areas that you want covered. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everyone that has spoken today. So Sarah, Claire and Hugh, thank you very much for your participation on this. Our contact details will be shared shortly, so that if you do have any questions or areas that you'd like to further discuss with us, then please get in touch. We all work quite closely together on these topics, so fire those in and we'd be more than happy to get in touch with you and understand how we can help.
Right, do we finish with the classic?
Bye! Everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much.
See you on the next event.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.